Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
You already know the feeling. You don't even have to think about it. You're standing in your own kitchen, or maybe your own living room, the one you've worked your whole life to fill with things that matter. And you're scrolling. And then there she is, an old friend, a neighbor. Maybe a woman you've never even properly met, just someone who floats at the edge of your world. And in 30 seconds, something happens inside you that no one ever teaches you to name. It isn't quite sadness. It isn't quite anger. It's something quieter and more corrosive than either one. It's that hollow sinking where your stomach drops half an inch and your morning, which was perfectly fine just a moment ago, suddenly feels thin, insufficient, like a dress you pulled from the back of the closet that doesn't fit the way you remembered. That feeling, that's the comparison trap snapping shut. And here's what I want you to stay with before we rush past it, before we reach for the easy comfort and the tidy lesson. Because this part matters. You are not weak for feeling it. You are not petty. You are not ungrateful. You are a human being with a nervous system that was wired, long before you were born, to scan its surroundings and ask the ancient question, am I enough? Do I measure up? We have been comparing ourselves to one another since before language. Since we lived in circles around fires and needed to know where we stood. That impulse is not a character flaw. It is a feature of being alive. But here's the tragedy. The original purpose of comparison, that quick, instinctive scan, was supposed to help us belong, to keep us safe, to tell us we were woven into the fabric of a community. What it was never meant to do, not in any cave or village or grandmother's kitchen, was make us feel less than. And yet somewhere along the way, that is exactly what it became, a measuring stick held to our own throats. And if you are a woman in her 50s, 60s, or 70s, you have been holding that measuring stick for a long, long time. Think about what the years have carried. You have watched friends move into houses that seem to breathe prosperity from every window. You've sat at retirement dinners for women who seem to glide into that next chapter without a single stumble, while you were still quietly renegotiating what this season of life was even supposed to look like. You have scrolled past photos of grandchildren who seem to arrive right on schedule for other women, and you have carried the unspoken weight of timelines that didn't unfold the way you once imagined they would. You have watched your own body change and measured it against women who seem, somehow, to have been spared. You have compared your marriages, your solitudes, your savings accounts. You have compared your faith, your health, your purpose, the quietness of Sunday mornings, the size of your joy. And you have done most of this comparing in absolute silence, because here is the unspoken truth about women of our generation. And I say our because I am standing in this with you, not above it. We were not raised to admit this hunger. We were raised to be grateful, to not want too much, to look at what we had and say it's enough, it's fine, I'm fine. And so the comparison lived underground, in that interior space we rarely let anyone see, doing its damage in the dark like roots cracking through a foundation. Don't you deserve to finally name it? I think you do. Because you cannot heal what you won't look at directly. And you cannot look at it directly if you are still ashamed that you feel it at all. The first gift I want to offer you today, before any technique, before any beautiful reframe, before we talk about the way out, is this simple, solid permission. You are allowed to have felt this. Every woman who has sat in her car in a parking lot, just for a minute, just to collect herself after seeing something that unexpectedly stung, she deserves to know she is not alone in that car. Every woman who has closed an app in irritation and then opened it again 30 seconds later, like picking at something that hurts because the comparison had already gotten its hooks in, she is not broken. She is human. She is tender in the places where we are all tender. And now together, we're going to start turning on the light. Let's stay in that parking lot for just a moment longer. Because I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, the way you'd answer a trusted friend at your kitchen table with the good coffee, not the company coffee. When you saw her, that woman, that photo, that life that seemed to have more shine on it than yours, who were you actually comparing yourself to? I mean, really. Was it her? Or was it a version of yourself that you once believed you were supposed to become? Sit with that for a second, because it changes everything. Here's what the research tells us, and here's what I've come to know in my own bones: comparison, at its deepest root, is almost never actually about the other person. She is just the mirror. She is the surface the reflection happens on. What we are truly measuring ourselves against every single time is the internal blueprint we've been carrying, often since we were young women, sometimes since we were girls, of what our lives were supposed to look like by now. She triggered the gap, but the gap was already there, living quietly inside you, waiting. And here is where the psychology gets both painful and, I promise, ultimately freeing. There is a term researchers use: the social comparison theory. It was named by a psychologist named Leon Festinger back in the 1950s. And the basic idea is this: human beings have a deep, almost biological drive to evaluate themselves. And when we don't have an objective ruler to measure against, we use other people. We always have. We always will. But here's the part Festinger didn't fully anticipate, because he didn't know about smartphones. He didn't know about the curated theater of modern life. And it is this: we are now comparing our unedited interior lives to everyone else's highlight reel. You are comparing your 3 a.m. worries to her vacation photos. You are comparing the argument you had last Tuesday, the one that left a residue you still haven't quite shaken, to her anniversary post with the flowers and the caption about 30 years of love. You are comparing your body on a hard morning to her body on her best afternoon. It is not a fair fight. It was never a fair fight. And somewhere in you, you already know that. And yet knowing it doesn't seem to make the sting any smaller, does it? That's because this isn't a logic problem. This is a wound that lives below the level of logic. For women in this particular season of life. And I want to be careful here, because I'm not talking about every woman over 50. I'm talking about you, the woman who has lived with intention, who has loved people who didn't always love her back the way she needed, who has sacrificed and pivoted and quietly renegotiated her dreams more times than she can count. The comparison trap carries an extra weight, a specific gravity that younger women don't quite feel yet, and that weight is time. When you are 25, and you compare yourself to a friend who seems ahead of you, there is this cushion of future underneath the feeling. There's a voice that says, maybe not consciously, but it's there: I still have time. I can still catch up. The story isn't over. That cushion softens the blow. But somewhere in our 50s and 60s, that cushion begins to thin. And suddenly comparison doesn't just make us feel behind. It makes us feel behind with a deadline. And that is a completely different animal. That is where the quiet grief lives. Not grief that announces itself dramatically, but the kind that settles in on a Sunday evening when the house is still. The kind that whispers its inventory: the things I haven't done, the person I thought I'd be, the life I thought I'd have built by now. That grief is real. It deserves to be honored, not bypassed. But, and this is where I want you to lean in, that grief is also built in large part on a fiction. A deeply convincing fiction, one we've been reinforcing for decades, but a fiction nonetheless. The fiction is this: that there was ever one right version of your life. That somewhere, on some other branch of time, there is a woman who made all the right choices and arrived at this moment satisfied and complete and finished comparing herself to anyone. That she exists and you are somehow not her. She doesn't exist. She has never existed. Not for anyone. The women you are comparing yourself to, they are sitting in their own parking lots. They are carrying their own unspoken inventories. They have their own Sunday evenings. The version of someone's life that you are measuring against yours is a silhouette. It has shape, but no interior. And you are comparing your full, complicated, beautifully messy interior against a shape. That is the trap. That is precisely it. And the reason it's so hard to escape, even when we know this intellectually, even when we've heard it 100 times, is that the knowing lives in the mind, but the feeling lives in the body, in the chest, in that half-inch drop in the stomach I mentioned at the beginning. You can't think your way out of something that isn't happening in the thinking part of you. Which means the way out isn't more information. It isn't another quote on a notepad about blooming where you're planted. It isn't a productivity system or a gratitude list, though those things have their place. The way out runs through something older and quieter than any of that. It runs through the slow, sacred work of coming home to yourself. So let's talk about what actually works. Not the advice that sounds good on a coffee mug. Not the kind of wisdom that makes you nod in the moment and then evaporates by Thursday. I mean the kind of shift that actually changes the texture of your daily life. The kind that doesn't ask you to become someone different. It asks you to finally, fully become who you already are. And I want to start here with something that might surprise you. The antidote to comparison is not gratitude. I know, you've been told it is. You've probably tried it. Someone's told you, write down 3 things you're grateful for, count your blessings, look at what you have instead of what she has. And gratitude is a beautiful practice. I am not dismissing it. But if gratitude were the cure, you'd have been cured by now. Because women like you, women who have survived hard things, who have loved deeply, who have shown up for others in ways that cost them something, are not ungrateful. You are probably one of the most grateful people in your own life. And you still feel the sting of comparison, which tells you that gratitude alone isn't the medicine. It's more like a bandage over something that needs a different kind of tending. The real antidote to comparison is clarity. Specifically, clarity about whose life you are actually trying to live. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Not answer immediately. Just hold it the way you'd hold a warm cup with both hands on a cold morning when you imagine a life that feels deeply, quietly satisfying to you. Not impressive, not enviable, not Instagram worthy. What does it actually look like? Not what should it look like? Not what would make your mother proud or your neighbor curious. What would make you feel at the end of an ordinary Tuesday? Like you are living something that is genuinely, unmistakably yours. Because here is what I have come to understand: comparison thrives in a vacuum of self-knowledge. It rushes in to fill the space where our own vision should be. When we don't have a clear, felt sense of what we are building, what we are moving toward, what we value in the sanctuary of our own interior, then we unconsciously borrow someone else's map. And then we feel terrible when their map doesn't fit our terrain. The women I have seen make genuine peace with comparison, not perfectly, not permanently, but genuinely. They all share one quiet thing. They have done the work of knowing themselves with a kind of radical honesty. They have sat down with their own lives without flinching, and they have decided, not just drifted into, what this chapter is for. And I want to offer you a way into that. There is a practice I think of as writing your own last chapter first. Not in a morbid way, stay with me. Imagine yourself at the very end of your life, in whatever form that feels peaceful to you. You are looking back. And the life you are looking back on is one that satisfied you deeply, not because it was perfect, not because it looked a particular way from the outside, but because it was yours. It had your fingerprints all over it. It was shaped by what you actually loved, not by what you thought you were supposed to want. What does that life contain? I'm not asking about achievements. I'm asking about texture, about ordinary mornings, about the kinds of conversations that happened around your table, about whether there was music or quiet or both, about who you let in close and how you loved them, about what you made with your hands or your words or your presence, about the small dignities you protected and the old fears you finally set down. That vision, however partial, however tentative, is your compass. And the moment you have a compass, comparison loses most of its power. Because you can look at her life, at whatever she has that seemed to make yours feel thin, and you can genuinely ask, does that belong on my map? Sometimes the answer is yes, and that's useful information. It's not envy, it's aspiration, and aspiration is healthy. But often, if you're honest, the answer is no. What she has belongs to her map, her terrain, her particular journey. And the sting you felt wasn't really about wanting her life. It was about momentarily forgetting the beauty of your own. Now, let's talk about the daily practice. Because a compass is only useful if you actually look at it. The first thing, and this is small, but it isn't simple, is learning to notice the moment the comparison begins. Not to stop it, not to scold yourself for it, but to notice it. To become a gentle, curious witness to your own interior. When you feel that half-inch drop in your stomach, instead of immediately scrolling past or pushing the feeling down or reaching for the quick comfort of the next thing, pause. Just for 3 breaths. And ask, what just happened inside me? What did I just measure and against what? That pause is not nothing. That pauses everything, because it inserts a tiny sliver of consciousness between the trigger and the spiral. And in that sliver, you have a choice you didn't have before. The second thing is what I call tending your own garden in full. We talk about this metaphor all the time, but we rarely talk about what it actually means to do it. It means this: deliberately, regularly turning your full attention toward what is already alive and growing in your own life. Not with forced positivity, not with performed cheerfulness, but with the same quality of attention you might give to a plant you love. Noticing what's budding, noticing what needs water, noticing what has bloomed so quietly you almost missed it. What are you growing right now? What is taking shape in your life that doesn't have a name yet, that isn't ready to be photographed or announced, but that you can feel is real and yours? A friendship deepening, a skill returning, a courage that's been building slowly in the place where an old fear used to live. A way of being in the morning that feels more like you than it did a year ago. These things are real, they count. They are the actual substance of your life, and comparison will never, ever capture them. Because they live in the interior, in the quiet whispers of your own becoming, and the interior is the one place no highlight reel can reach. The third thing, and perhaps the most radical, is this: choose your comparisons consciously. If you are going to compare, and you will because you are human, then compare yourself to yourself. Compare who you are today to who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Look at the woman you were then, what she was afraid of that you are no longer afraid of. What she didn't know yet that you now carry with hard-won ease. What she was still holding that you have since had the grace and the courage to put down. That woman is the right measuring stick. Not your neighbor, not your college roommate, not the woman in the algorithm who seems to have solved some equation you're still working. You then. You now. That is the only comparison that tells you something true. And when you make that comparison honestly, I think you will find, I suspect you already know, somewhere beneath the noise, that you have traveled much further than you've given yourself credit for. That the woman you are today has survived things, integrated things, softened in places and strengthened in others, in ways that the younger you could not have imagined and would have deeply admired. She would have admired you. Sit with that for a moment before we move to the last thing I want to share with you. Because you've earned it, I want to tell you about a particular kind of afternoon. You've probably had one, even if you didn't pause long enough to name it. It's the kind of afternoon where the light comes through the window at just the right angle, and you're doing something ordinary. Washing dishes, or folding something warm from the dryer, or sitting with a cup of something you actually like. And for a few minutes, maybe just 2 or 3, the noise stops, the measuring stops. The inventory of what you have and don't have and should have and almost had goes quiet. And what's left is just you, present, breathing. And it feels, doesn't it, like a sanctuary. Not because anything changed. Not because she disappeared from your social media feed or because your circumstances suddenly rearranged themselves into something more enviable. But because, for those few minutes, you stopped holding the measuring stick. You just were. Without comparison, without apology, without the exhausting performance of adequacy. That is not an accident. That is not luck. That is what it feels like to come home to yourself. And I want you to know something that I carry with real conviction. That I would sit across from you and say eye to eye that freedom is not a reward for fixing yourself. It is not waiting for you on the other side of self-improvement. It is not something you earn by becoming more disciplined or more grateful or more at peace than you currently are. It is available to you right now, in this body, in this life, in this chapter, as imperfect and as unfinished and as honestly complicated as all of it is. But you do have to choose it. Gently, repeatedly, imperfectly, you have to choose it. And part of choosing it is understanding something that I think we don't say plainly enough to women who have reached this particular season of life. Something that gets dressed up in inspirational language until it loses its teeth. So let me say it plainly. The years you have lived are not a liability. They are not evidence of time running out. They are not a long list of should, haves that comparison gets to use against you. They are the very thing that gives you access to a kind of peace that younger women, no matter how beautiful or successful or seemingly sorted, cannot yet reach. Because peace of this kind isn't given. It's built, slowly, through loss and adaptation.